what I think about raising puppies is the truth is everything can wait except the socialization. So like that has to be your number one priority is you get the dog out and you start showing it the world. And where I think most people go wrong with puppy socialization is that they bring the dogs out and they start like, the traditional idea is positive experience with everything. So you see these people taking these dogs out and they've got their treat bag and they're just like feeding all the time. And I don't think that's socialization. I think what I want to do is socialize my dog in the lowest form of arousal that I can because I want my dog to actually, or my puppy, I want my puppy to actually look around and go like, I'm taking all this in and none of these things are a problem to me. Because you have that critical period of like imprinting up to 16 weeks. And we want to use that really wisely. But the other thing is what we want to do is like capitalize on the ignorance of puppies, right? So if the dog's from a good bloodline, they shouldn't come with any, they shouldn't come with any preconceived notions of things that they should be afraid of, right? Like, and if your puppy comes and it's already sort of hesitant at that 8-week mark, then you know, okay, we've got a lot of work to do. But typically puppies come and they're usually pretty bold, like, because they're just idiots. They don't know better about anything, right? So they just run around and they're like, I'm in charge of everything. And you're like, yeah, cool, you are, right? And so for me, it's a harness and it's a flexi lead, and I take that puppy as many places as I possibly can. And what I don't try to do, like most people will say, like, I've got half an hour, I'm going to take the puppy to that place for half an hour. I'm going to have it like, settled in as if it's home. And that's probably unnecessary. What I would rather do, if I've only got half an hour to use, I'd go to, 5 or 6 places for just a few minutes each. And I want the dog to just be like, this is all normal, right? Now, I will talk about loading a marker and stuff in a moment, and I think that's important. You should do that. But so I will take food with me, and I will have my clicker with me because I'll use that as my marker that's loaded for food. And with the puppy, I'm going to only be training with food. I'll be doing a lot of other stuff, but I'll be training with food. In what the puppy would recognize as an operant session where he's like, I'm learning and I'm performing actions for food. Of course, I'm training all the time with toys and gameplay and all that sort of stuff, but that's more classical. I don't want him to understand so much that he's being trained. So anyway, I'm out in the environment and I don't intend to give that puppy any of the food that I have unless something goes wrong. So I don't carry it in a way like I'm not luring the dog around. I'm not showing him like, hey, look at this so that I can pay you or make a positive association. What I actually want is a puppy just to have like neutral experiences. And by being neutral, they then therefore are kind of positive because he's out interacting. He's having a good time just as himself rather than being kicked into drive for food. And then we're immediately in that operant model where the dog's going, okay, what can I do in order to earn that food? And he starts trialing with behaviors. I want to avoid that. I just want him to be like, hey, I see a truck. I didn't get run over by the truck. Trucks mean nothing to me, right? I see a person over there. The person is neutral, that they're not that important to me. And I'm happy with my puppy to go and interact with people. Mostly I like to deal in dogs that will eventually have to bite people. And even those, I still want them to go and experience people and just have like neutral experiences. They can be pat by people. They can just learn people are around. One thing I will talk about in a moment about, I don't want them getting a lot of value from other people, but I want them to at least just sort of interact with them a little bit and be comfortable in their presence. So that's the main thing. Socialization, bang, 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 as much as that as you can, and don't overdo it. The second piece of advice that I really strongly try to give people about puppies is, people who have had kids can identify this, but sometimes a puppy just has this meltdown for no reason, right? And people are like, oh my God, what's wrong with the puppy? He's tired, right? Puppies just have these meltdowns, and just like little kids, they just become little assholes for no apparent reason. And you just pulling your hair out going like, what has led to this chain of events, right? Like, how have I suddenly got this hellhound in my house and he's having a tantrum and they bark and they can show, sometimes you see people's puppies like putting on a display that really looks like quite aggressive, right? And they're just having temper tantrum. They're tired, right? So managing their work to sleep ratio and not overdoing that sort of stuff, that seems so obvious, but it just gets really overlooked. I think we have to really put ourselves in the puppy's shoes and be like, you're a baby, right? Like they are just these tiny little babies that they don't know anything and they're just reacting on impulse, right? They're just living their little genetic predispositions. So, you have to manage a lot of that because they won't put themselves to bed. It's rare that if you've crate trained your puppy, then you've got the crate door open, that a puppy's playing with you and then goes, you know what, I've had enough of this, I'm going to take myself off to bed. What's going to happen is he's just suddenly going to start biting the shit out of you and have this tantrum, right? And then you have to then go, all right, traditionally we would say, my puppy's mouthing at me, there's all these ways we can manage and deal with that and we can redirect and all of that. And maybe you should do that. But if you think, oh, wow, it's been 4 hours since he's been asleep, instead of even bothering with any of that, we're just going to put him away, right? And let him sleep it off. And you don't see that advice too many places, but that's something that like is very important to me, is managing their rest, right? And, rest is where they confirm the learning that they've been through during the day. So rest is super important to the puppies. As far as actually training behaviors goes, right? So that's something that I don't rush to do either. Like I don't want to rush to put anything on command. The first thing and the most important thing to me is loading the marker, right? So right from the get-go, I'm going to start training with food. And there's a lot of content out there you can probably find of me explaining how to load that marker. But what I want is that it's the clicker I like to use is a marker for food. It's what I implement with puppies. And I want it to be a terminal release marker. So like what you were doing over there, you no longer have to do, come back to me and get the food. And I do that via like click, throw a piece, click, throw a piece. And when they've got those, click, come back to me, take as much as you can. And like I say, there's plenty of video about that out there and you can check that out. So once I have that, I'm going to start teaching a send away. The reason I teach a send away is just to a marker board, right? Is because I get a lot of behaviors from that. Probably the most important behavior I want in a puppy, no matter what its purpose will be later, is a recall, right? Every dog needs a good solid recall. And by teaching a dog to go away from me, when I mark and reinforce for going away, I'm also getting my recall, right? So rather than just like creating distance from the dog in order to teach a recall to get him running back, I have the dog understand and create the distance himself as a job, and it goes out to a marker board. And then from going to the marker board, that becomes a bunch of other behaviors much later on in the dog's life. But I want him to go away from me to come back. Having that marker board then gives me a lot of opportunities to use that in training later. Imagine my dog does have an issue with something. I can put the marker board near it and I can have him like approach the thing that he has an issue with. He can approach indirectly by going to his marker board. And there's lots of things we can discuss about that. The next one is I do the box work, right? And, depending on the puppy and your ultimate goal for it would depend how I would do that box work and whether we're looking to just strengthen nerve and, keep it at the top of its genetic potential versus actually inoculate it to a stimulus that will come, right? So it starts out for me as I just, they're eating from the box and I just make it a little bit difficult to get into there, right? So I've loaded my markers, that might take a week or two, the maximum. And then I'm starting training this stuff. And with the box, all I do is just feed them in there and the difficulty is getting in. And you might make them hunt a little bit in there like it's full of bottles or there's some struggle to get over it and get in. But I don't harass them while they're eating. It's the process of getting to the food that I make a little bit difficult. Nothing over the top. It's not until they're sort of 16 weeks-ish that I start to worry about building any duration into that sort of thing, right? So where I would go to the food being in my pouch and the dog going in there and me trickling food in and then the desensitization techniques. One thing that I would consider doing while the dog's eating is if there's a specific, depending on your, ultimately what you intend to do with the puppy, is if there's a specific trigger or, accessory or weapon that someone will use against a puppy. So for me in the bite work, it's can curtain, right? So what I want is to devalue the can curtain as a stimulus that carries direct value. So I don't want my dog to look at the can curtain and be like, that's something that's important to me. Can curtain, clatter stick, that kind of thing. What I want is for him to hear it while he's eating and know that it's unimportant. Right. So I'm devaluing it in that way. And all these things that would later be used against my puppy against my dog to make him break position or distract him away from what he's doing. I want to start imprinting him quite young that means nothing to you, right? Like, don't worry about that. That means keep doing what you're doing. And, if we're doing sports, then the specific things that would be used in the sport is the thing to use. Otherwise, normal life environmental stuff. Be really careful doing that though, right? Like, where I see so many videos of people, and certainly I've been guilty of this myself, is it's not a race. Like, you're not trying, there is no end goal. So don't try and move forward in leaps and bounds. Be very careful. Sometimes I see people using the box technique or other ways to desensitize a dog to a leaf blower, for example, and actually they're sensitizing the dog to the leaf blower. They're giving the leaf blower a lot of value. They're like saying to the puppy, this thing's really important. And, there's two ways that can go wrong. It can go wrong by giving it a specific value that, has a function of interacting with the leaf blower, right? And that could be by the puppy's eating or doing whatever, and they turn on a leaf blower and the puppy looks at it, and then they turn it off. So then the puppy goes, okay, when there's a problem, I should focus on that problem, and therefore that will stop the problem. We don't want them to learn that. So you want to avoid that situation altogether. So the logical answer then is, imagine he's eating and I turn the leaf blower on and he looks at me, looks at the leaf blower. I mustn't turn it off because now I don't want him to become operant and understanding that he controls it. But also, I don't want to overdo it, right? So now I'm kind of trapped, right? Whereas if I keep it on, he might become scared of it because the pressure of it accumulates and he realizes this is a problem. So be very careful. Everything really low threshold, and you don't want to create an issue. You want things to just happen in the background and the dog be like, that's nothing, that doesn't mean anything to me, rather than risk the dog going like, that seems to be very important in my life because it comes up every time I'm eating, right? So just be really careful sort of going through that. The other thing that I will train is the unforced force fetch. So all I'm doing there is starting to basically free shape a hold of a pipe, right? And I start with my finger in the first couple of sessions because, like you do this in front of a puppy and they're going to bite your finger, right? So I do that and they bite and I mark and I start showing them like, holding these things in your mouth. And then I get a little piece of pipe or, anything, and you slide it on your finger or you present it, and anything like minimally you can put some prey into it so it's interesting to the dog. But when they sniff it, you click, and ultimately they hold it, right? The tagline from Bart is, from kissing comes fucking. A lot of people say like, he's looking at it but he won't take the next step, and it's just reinforce that a few times and then he'll lick it and then he'll bite it and it'll progress. And then the reason I would teach that is, it gives us a lot of functionality. It gives us the bite, right? And so if you're going to, no matter whether you're going to have a biting dog, a retrieving dog, a disc dog, an obedience dog, whatever, at some point they're going to be asked to hold something in their mouth, and that gives us the ability to compel them to do that later, right? And we start out doing it really positively so that we imprint that this is a really good thing. It gives us the bite. It gives us the out, because when they've got it in their mouth, they've got to let go of it in order to take reinforcer. And by giving that click, we can then pay them, and we condition the response that the click is actually spit that out. We say our word that means out 1 second before the click, and then out, it's falling out of his mouth. Now we can get rid of the click, and so our out is actually very motivational. It just means a transition rather than a loss, right? And so they're the three things that I'll be teaching a puppy and using food to teach. Those are less important than just playing with it and developing like that gameplay. That is, after socialization, that's probably the most important thing, right? And that, to me, what I feel really passionately about is, I don't use that gameplay to reinforce behaviors, the tug and all that kind of stuff, until I've first taught the dog how to play it, right? And so you see a lot of people who've created a dog over their life that isn't really into those things. Like, they say, hey, it's not into toys and doesn't want to play. And that's because during their critical period, they made gameplay and toy interactions transactional. You have to do this in order to earn that. And the dog goes, you know what? Like, I'm not that into that. Like, I'm not going to perform a task to in order to earn something I don't really care about. And so then the imprinting becomes like, this is not something you're that interested in. What I want to do is give it to the dog for free. So we're going to play heaps, and through doing that, I'm going to develop trust and relationship, but I'm also going to be building something powerful that I can use as a reinforcer later. All right. So the gameplay is free for as long as it needs to be. And, with little puppies, because they typically have very high food drive, and if you've implemented the marker, you can interrupt that. You can start building your out a little bit before you've even got it proper on the hold. You can start using it in that gameplay. And in that gameplay as well, you start loading your marker. And so, that will be for the toy later. So whether it's a little rag that you're using or a rope or a ball, whatever, you're agitating the puppy with it. He's chasing it around, and when he's going to be able to get it, right? Just prior to you allowing them to get it, that's where I say yes, or, in my case, I say that's my marker for that kind of game. Yeah, and so then the moment I decide you're about to get your toy, I give that, and that gets loaded every time. And just don't rush to wanting to use that. We'll load it for as long as it needs to be, and then when the dog actually knows some behaviors, much later, you can use that to release them from the behaviors, right? But my main advice, so that's kind of my the blueprint that I have for raising a puppy. Socialization is the most important thing, and everything else can wait, right? Absolutely everything else can wait. If you have to choose, that's the most important thing. Low drive, you don't want the dog to be just in drive during its socialization period. You want it to be actually experiencing everything. And at worst, if a problem occurs, you can click and try and hopefully create a conditioned response and change the dog's feelings about something if he develops a bad feelings about something. But I want him to just find out, what's this like? And of course, I'm very carefully controlling his interactions. I'm not just putting him out there and hoping for the best. I know how it's going to go. If he has a negative experience with something, that has to take me by surprise as well. It has to be something that was outside of my control. I really want to avoid that. So socialization, gameplay, toy play, developing relationship, and then developing markers and training behaviors. And really, you can be doing all those things at once, but that's the order that they're important to me, right? What else? Then the other thing is, the only last part of the dog's life in that is management in the home. And that kind of depends on how you're going to live with the puppy. But from my point of view, puppies kind of live on a 2-hour cycle. So I train, and I'm training with kibble, and then I'm playing as well. And I usually play with puppies with quite porous kind of rags and that kind of stuff. So I'm training with food that's going to dry him out a bit. He's then biting stuff that's going to dry him out a bit. I can count on him being thirsty at the end of the session. I blow a whistle, gives me an opportunity to load that marker, has his whistle, drinks his water, and then they're tired, right? Because we've just fully expressed out themselves as much as we can. That's when they're outside the crate. And that's when I bring them into the home, and they're in the family area where I will ultimately want them to be chilled out. All right. And then I'm showing a conditioned state of arousal for being in that area. I make them tired, and then I bring them into that area where they can just be tired, right? And hang out. And then that low state of arousal, they can be that way. Then I've got branch plans, right? If they go crazy and it's not that they're tired and don't need to be put away, I put them outside or into their playpen or wherever, right? This is the area where you can go be a little asshole, right? And then if they start getting sleepy, they're going to go to sleep, that's when I put them back into the crate and they have their sleep. And then as soon as they've finished sleeping, right, the cycle begins again. When I can count on them waking up, I don't want to wake them up, but when they're going to wake up, I open the crate, they go out, they pee and poo, we play, we do whatever, we interact, we go to socialization, we do all the things that I know makes you tired and thirsty, then we just start that whole cycle again, right? And that's pretty much the blueprint that I have for raising a puppy, no matter what it's going to do. I don't care whether it's going to be a pet or it's going to be a police dog. Basically, they all follow that same cycle.